Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. And this will be another exciting session on following up on cloud-related discussions and the venture discussions around cloud. The third follow-up to that, if you will, is opportunities in the SaaS space as well as challenges. Obviously, over the past decade, the SaaS market has grown pretty rapidly and matured as well at the same time. And what's up for this segment moving forward? That's the discussion we would like to have with our enlightened panelists here. We have a mix of folks that run companies, run strategy for companies, as well as data scientists. So I will let the panelists introduce themselves. Very delighted to and looking forward to an engaging discussion. So we'll start with Rameshs, if you can start introducing yourselves, and also your brief initial thoughts on this topic. That would be great.
Okay, name is Rameshs Srinivasan. I'm currently CEO of Uyala. We are an intelligent online video. Background about 30 years in B2B, B to limited B, enterprise software. A lot of it on on-prem license maintenance model. I've just moved into the SaaS world. Just moved to the Bay Area about 5 months ago. So after spending a lot of time in technology in Los Angeles, Atlanta, Las Vegas, and in casino gaming as well. So I've just moved into this area, and I'll give you my comments on this comparisons between on-prem license maintenance model versus the SaaS model as we go along in this next 30 minutes or so. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Pramod. I am part of the strategy and corporate development team at VMware. Background, I'm an engineer, used to do product development and product management, and I moved on to the strategy and corporate development side a few years ago. At VMware, my focus is mostly investments and joint ventures. We are stage agnostics, invest in mostly infrastructure, software, security. Even if you're not looking to raise from a corporate VC, I would recommend reaching out. It helps develop relationships for future partnerships, or maybe it also helps develop our M&A pipeline.
Sure. My name is Satish. I work for Microsoft in the Cloud Server Infrastructure division. So we are primarily focused on the predictive failure maintenance within the devices and the components within the data center. So we do not only track the install base in different data centers within Microsoft, but also we do the correlation analysis between the failure rate as well as the environmental effects due to temperature, relative humidity, pressure, etc. So this conference is primarily in the cloud space, and all our data that we are doing, big data analytics, as well as the insights that we are developing for the executives is within the cloud. And prior to that, I worked for Nokia, which is also like where we track the user-based analysis on the browser to do interesting analysis on the recommendation and personalization, and everything is on AWS. So having a mix of AWS exposure and Azure, I think I would like to bring some of the perspectives within this talk. So.
My name is Jagdish Bandole. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Mobile Force Software. I've had about 15 years of experience in dealing with a lot of different cloud technologies, both on the infrastructure side as well as the application side. My primary background is enterprise software. Ran a couple of companies, startups, venture-backed companies, and also been part of larger organizations like Hewlett-Packard and Veritas. So mix of different perspectives, what it takes to build and what it takes to procure and run. I would love to share that. Also, in terms of what we do currently, primarily focused around integrating applications and providing seamless access to enterprise applications as a service. Pretty interesting space. It's a big problem to be solved in the industry, so love to share that.
Thank you to the panelists. So we'll start off with a couple of questions, and then for those of you in the audience, there's a TiEcon app. If you guys can submit your questions through the app, and as they come by, we'll reserve a few minutes toward the end of the discussion that I can ask the panelists on. Now, let's start with obviously, as I mentioned at the outset, the likes of Workday and Salesforce have made this really a big deal. And it looks like to me, at least, that the horizontal SaaS market has been conquered by these big players, right? So where do you guys see future opportunities, and how do you decide? If you are an entrepreneur, I want to build a SaaS solution or an application or a service. What do I focus on? Is now, based on the underlying innovation and technology, does everything lend itself to be provided in SaaS? And to start with, like Ramesh, your thoughts, because you have an interesting mix of leading a company that primarily produced on-prem software, and now you're leading a SaaS platform. Where do you think we're moving? And then others can follow up. Satish and others appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, sure, Sriram. The train in terms of moving from on-prem to SaaS to the cloud, that train has already left the station. No question about that. So that trend is irreversible, and in everything that we do, the fact that we don't want something permanent, but we want something temporary that we could switch easily, not only with enterprise thought, with personal thought, that train has clearly left the station. There is absolutely no question about that. So the trend is definitely moving towards SaaS and to the cloud. So having said that, especially in the B2B world, especially in the B to limited B world, in the way I think of enterprise software always, I break it up into a few areas. One, of course, is B2C. Let's stay out of that. It doesn't fall in the definition of enterprise software. But B2, lots of Bs, the Microsofts, the Oracles of the world, even when they do enterprise work. And then there are companies that deal with B to limited Bs. I have worked in companies with less than 3,000 customers most of the time. In B to limited Bs, you always have to be careful not to get overtaken by hype. As in B to limited B, you have to stay with the market. Being ahead of the market by 5 years is as much a sin and could destroy your organization as being behind by 5 years is. You have to be just about right. So I know of very successful companies today that are working with on-prem license-based software that is doing extremely well. They are among the best performers in the stock market. They are doing well. Ultimately, they will move to SaaS. It is a matter of how fast and how quickly. And so my advice always would be listen to your customers, right? If your customers, and move at the pace at which they are pushing you. If you're starting something new, it absolutely makes sense to go the SaaS cloud way.
And Satish, any thoughts here?
The cloud and SaaS, if I think about that, or in the growth trajectory, to become at least as much as on-premise cloud. In my recent interactions with some of the CIO in the strategy meetings, I was told that I was asked what's your opinion on the on-premise model? And they say it's a traditional model that we would like to follow because of the regulatory compliances and the security aspects of it, or the prevailing things that they are looking at. And they think that they are not ready in terms of moving to the public or private cloud architecture. But from my viewpoint, I think they coexist, the on-premise as well as the public cloud coexist together. And the IT architectures, with regards to the IT architectures, at some point in the future, they will try to converge. If you take Microsoft as well as Azure, Amazon, they are kind of already embedding some of the primary cloud features into their core platform. So from the application standpoint of view, when I wanted to predict confidently what's going to happen in the future, in the application code, whatever the DevOps write, it's going to be very agnostic in terms of whether they are running on the on-premise platform or on the cloud platform. So,
thanks, Satish. Now, let's say some of the budding entrepreneurs here in the audience have a great idea to be offered as a SaaS service. Now, unlike the traditional model, what challenges do they face in terms of upfront costs of not only just building from an application perspective, but in the SaaS world, your entire company is online, right? It's not like people don't see your level of technical support, your the agility and pace of innovation, et cetera, et cetera. So what are your thoughts, Jagdish, and Pramod, from your role, looking at companies from a strategy perspective? So we'll start with Jagdish here.
Yeah, thanks. When you look at starting a SaaS company, obviously there's the infrastructure component, right? We've talked about that. To me, I think that's actually generally it tends to be the easier of the problems to solve for most entrepreneurs. A lot of them are engineer turned entrepreneurs. Usually they have a pretty good handle on it. And nowadays with the public cloud availability, it's a pretty competitive market. From a cost perspective, you can get started pretty easily. There are a couple of things you want to keep in mind, obviously, because as Sriram rightly pointed out, that's your company is online, right? That's your entire company. Your product is your company. So SLA becomes important, right? It's a key deciding factor. It's pretty critical. So having monitoring, backups, DR, all that stuff, it becomes even more important, availability. But the real issue is beyond that. The real issue I think you need to pay a lot of attention, I think, is really on the sales and marketing side. The cost of going to market and cost of customer acquisition, to be specifically. Because when you look at subscription models, you don't get all of that paid up front, unlike a perpetual license model. So you're sort of playing catch up, and there's a particular point at which you're going to break even on a customer by customer basis, at which point it starts to become profitable. So, tracking those metrics and keeping that in mind, comparing that with the cost of customer acquisition is important. There's also another consideration in SaaS, which is depending on the type of target customer you're going after. I mean, there's one school of, one set of companies which have traditionally started with the SMB focus and kind of grown into the enterprise world. Salesforce.com is a great example. They did phenomenally well from that perspective. The challenges associated with that is very different. It tends to be a lot more marketing driven. You're probably selling a lot through inside sales and things like that. So your makeup of your marketing and sales budgets are going to be different, and the metrics you track. You obviously have to deal a lot with churn. Keep an eye on churn. So customer retention, monetizing the customers, acquiring, retention, and monetizing. All three become important aspects. But there are also a crop of companies of late, and we are one of those as well, which deal with different set of challenges where we are starting off at the enterprise level, not necessarily an SMB level, but you start with an enterprise SaaS kind of a model. The challenges there are very different, right? Selling to an enterprise, sales cycle times become important, so you got to have a cost of customization is something you got to keep in mind. And also this whole notion of OpEx versus CapEx become important, because when you sell to enterprises, that's an important aspect for them. If you have a big ticket price, OpEx dollars are always harder to come from, and they're always first on the chopping block when things don't go right. So you have to make sure that you stay ahead of that. So some considerations that I would advise for the entrepreneurs from what I've seen.
Yes, I'll give a slightly different perspective. So one of the reasons that SaaS is so popular is because for a customer they just have to pay one bill per month. Traditionally they had to buy infrastructure, the middleware, everything. But it's good for the customers. But if you are a SaaS developer or if you're trying to start a SaaS company, now you have to figure out all of that for the customer, right? So infrastructure problems are very different with SaaS. It actually touches both your architecture as well as organization. So if you're just a budding entrepreneur, you want to start a SaaS company, initially you could start with public cloud, or you can go to one of these specialized, small hosting company that can give you a lot of help. But as you scale, I would suggest, like, before hiring your sales and marketing, find an ops guy who can figure out, what it takes to support all the customers. The other thing I want to touch upon is infrastructure drives a lot of the decisions in the architecture as well as organization. So like I said before, hiring sales and marketing, you want to hire an ops guy, you want to hire a customer experience guy, you want to buy a lot of tools which will help you manage your SLAs, security and everything. And on the architecture side, infrastructure drives a lot of architecture decisions, because you have to worry about, you cannot hard code anything, because you can run it on any public cloud. It has to migrate to any other cloud. And just in terms of scaling, You must have heard about microservices and all the other trends, and those are all real. I mean, that is how infrastructure affects your architecture decisions. I mean, if you're starting a company like, next week, you don't have to worry about microservices, but when you have to scale your company, you'll have to think about all these things in your architecture and in your organization, and that's how infrastructure affects all the SaaS companies. So traditionally, if you are just an on-prem, you just do your package software, you just throw it to the client, and the client takes care of everything. But when you run SaaS, infrastructure drives a lot of your decision making almost on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Pramod. So I'd like to follow up on one of the points that Satish had mentioned around data security and things in his discussions with CIOs of companies. So Ramesh, what are you seeing? Are you seeing from your own perspective, if you're selling your product to your customers, what aspects of kind of data security is hard from a SaaS business perspective, or are customers paranoid about?
A great question. So just to give you a little bit of background, Uyala has been in business for 9 years now. We just celebrated our 9th anniversary. And we have been collecting data about online video viewing habits for about 8 years now, across practically all our 500 plus customers. And we have been SaaS based for all practical purposes now. And not too many issues with data security, I'm happy to report, right? It is actually, if you think about data, in a sense, the SaaS world is a lot better than the on-prem world as far as data security and overall security is concerned. So if you think about it, if you have 200 different companies that you sell to, you're dependent on those IT departments to make sure the data is protected. While here SaaS, even if there are 5-6 partners involved in that digital supply chain, they're all top-notch technology companies that understand security quite well. Right? You're talking about the Amazons, the Akamais of the world who understand that quite well, which is why you hear a lot less stories of data breaches and hacking on the SaaS side than you hear about Las Vegas Sands, for example, or Target or Sony. You don't hear that many stories here. So in a lot of ways, the SaaS world is actually a lot better protected, even though the data passes through many hands. And there is distribution of accountability, that also helps. Therefore, even if you breach one area, it doesn't go to the other areas. While if you breach into one company, that company's IT department may not be best in the world, and they may not know it, while SaaS is really protected by top-notch companies. And they're also spread out. Even if it breaches in one area, it doesn't go to too many areas. So in terms of how we deal with the paranoia, your question, Sriram, we are very upfront about it. We are very transparent about it. We tell customers exactly what we can control and what we cannot control. We don't take on too many liabilities beyond our means to support. So everybody understands that all deals, there are risks both on the vendor side and the customer side. They understand that. So we've been very upfront. We've been very careful with data security. And so far, it's worked extremely well in the SaaS world. And it has also evolved over the last few years, that it is becoming better and better protected. So you should feel quite comfortable about data security in the SaaS world compared to the on-prem world. But as a vendor, I wouldn't take on too much liability. Right. There is liability that is shared. And always make sure that the liability you take up is related to what you are paid, not to the value you generate. Right? If I'm cleaning your carpet and I get paid only $20 an hour, I'm not going to take responsibility for a $3 million carpet in your $20 million home, if you know what I mean. So you got to be careful about that as well. And I think in the SaaS world, data security, and there's no better company to talk to you about that than Uyala. We have handled data, online video viewing habits across hundreds of customers, and we have had no major issues so far.
Great. Thanks, Ramesh. I can already tell that I'll have a tough time negotiating a SaaS contract with you, but as a buyer. But the other aspect of it is, in my role, I've been managing IT for a long time, and we love SaaS. I think we embrace the changed world, but it's also a pain in the butt when businesses go off and buy some software using a credit card, and all of a sudden all these SaaS applications spring up within an enterprise, right? And then at some point in time, data needs to be shared across, either for integration or reporting purposes. So how do you guys, if you are a SaaS company or if you are a SaaS vendor, do you play nice to other vendors, building connectors to other applications, or what sort of response do you all have for your customers? So we'll start with Jagdish, and Satish or Pramod, chime in, please.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah, I think most SaaS companies nowadays, at least, tend to have an open view because they have to operate in a heterogeneous world where they have to integrate with other applications. But you have to know where you want to draw the line in terms of things that you would take on and you would build connectivity to. People are generally smart about it. They tend to build things that are natural extensions. I mean, you see, if you look at Salesforce, they kind of build things into an inside view or a LinkedIn or other kinds of things, tools that their target audience would use. And that's generally what SaaS companies do. And I think I would advise anybody starting a SaaS company to definitely keep, the API economy in mind. The whole enterprise is moving towards an API economy. So without having a proper API layer architected, it's going to constrain you in terms of growth. So you need to have that. Now, would you take it to the next step to actually build extensions, connectors? That's a question of the value proposition you want to provide to the customers. If you're selling into a market where you need to play nice with other tools, you should do that because that makes it more attractive. But having at least an API layer enables third-party integrators and others to integrate, which also enhances the value because that, from a CIO's perspective, it's something that's attractive because then that it's not a closed system. That's from a vendor perspective. From a buyer's perspective, I've seen a great desire to have as much of an open system as possible because, to the point earlier made about one of the advantages of SaaS is, at least the perceived advantage, is you can swap out easily. And so when you swap out, you want to be able to migrate that functionality, that data, and without the proper kind of integration, you can't really do it. So you're locked in. So from a buyer's perspective, it's highly desired. So just keep that in mind as you go and market that.
Yeah, I think I wanted to comment on the API stuff. So from the IT organization perspective, there are assumptions for the data integration. So they think like when there is a vendor-related API, okay, that does the auto magic of data integration altogether. But which is not the case in many cases because there are some nuances in terms of the proprietariness of that API, as well as there are a lot of complex specs that are involved in coming up with that APIs. So we need to understand from the customer perspective, one should understand when choosing a vendor whether they are using the third-party integrator to actually do this data integration process, or will the API serve all the needs of the customer, etc. And there is also another presumption. So we have different components in terms of integration like the ELT, EDI, ETL, all the different integrators currently in the market. But again, there is a problem of whether the ETL, ELT, all these components would really fit in the cloud world, or is it too expensive? Do we have a workforce that are already together? So organizations have to assume that we need to have all these as a preparatory measures before undergoing or taking up any integration challenges. So on the other side of it, when we look into the challenges, when we are trying to do the data integration at Microsoft itself, we have a lot of challenges. One is the data exchange. Vendors or customers are really worried about or the security principles or the security mechanisms would remain same when the data exchange is happening, or how is the data flow orchestration that is going to take place, and what are the security concerns that are involved within the data that is in transit, what are the measures that you will be taking place. So all these challenges needs to be addressed, and we need to have that integration strategy. The enterprise integration strategy, data integration strategy, which addresses all these challenges and ensure that like the customer is well aware of all these challenges. So.
Thanks, Satish. So let me ask you this, question for all of you. Maybe quickly do a round on your thoughts on what are the future innovations that you see that are powering the SaaS service development, and also from a business perspective. I think Pramod, you touched on microservices, but with that we'll close it down. Quick thoughts on the opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Sriram. So just from an opportunities, I think you talked about how the horizontal SaaS apps, they're kind of you see all these big companies like Salesforce and Marketo kind of take that market. So the opportunity is really in vertical apps, when you're doing something for a particular industry, as well as mobile. So if you see 70% of the apps in the industry are still on-prem packaged custom apps. And as an entrepreneur, you have to figure out what you can do with those 70% of the apps. So that would be the biggest area to go after. And one of the reasons you still see 70% of the apps on-prem is because of data and security, right? So one of the things that a lot of SaaS entrepreneurs ignore is really they want their SaaS to be a new system of record. They want you to use their storage. They neglect using what data you have. You might have SAP, Oracle on-prem. They just don't want to use it. So the next opportunity, what I see is really where, kind of a hybrid architecture where you tap into existing IT, but you still keep some kind of a SaaS presence. Maybe it's a management layer, or maybe you're just working on metadata. And the second thing is really security. So security is a big concern for SaaS. And a lot of SaaS entrepreneurs, they don't pay too much attention. And that's one of the ugly side of SaaS that you only realize when you start selling it. So for that, providing controls for the IT admin, mainly identity, figuring out which users are doing what data they're uploading, providing encryption. A lot of entrepreneurs, they just focus on the SaaS UI. They try to make it very nice. They try to delight the customers. But then when they try to go sell it, they really don't have any of this figured out. Can the IT admin figure out what's going on here? Can they provide encryption? So the last thing I just want to add is some of the regulated industries like healthcare and financials, people think they are dumb, they are very risk averse, but they are fighting with some real regulations that they have to adhere with. And as a SaaS entrepreneur, you should spend a lot of time in getting all this compliance, security, making sure you have a record of which VM is running where, are these isolated, all that stuff. That will really help you grow your business.
All right, thanks. Before Tushar comes and physically evicts us, very good discussion, and I think you guys touched on some of the questions that came up on the app as well. So the panelists will be around. So if any of you guys want to talk to them, please make sure reach out to them. They'll be around here in the hall. And again, thank you, panelists, for a very insightful discussion, and the audience, for your patient listening. Thanks.